All right. Hello. Our group is uh Claudio, Jose Hernandez, and Adrian Sacapala. We are just gonna interview each other. So I'll start. Hello, my name is Claudio Garcia. I'm 28 years old, and I'm a business major with a concentration in finance. I also served my country for 4 years as an artillery cannon crew member in the United States Army. Growing up, I had divorced parents, but it was not an ordinary divorce where it was different where I would spend half of my life in Mexico, half of my life here in the United States. So I got a little bit to I got to experience a little bit of diversity since I was little up until I was 13 years old and I finally stayed here in California. They thought it was a better choice for me and I've been here ever since. Left for the Army at 18 and now I came back 22. I've been in college ever since trying to graduate. And I think going through this class has been very interesting for me because I'm learning more about Chicano's culture and just culture in general. So that's it for me. Um, Pleasure to meet you, Jose.
Hello. Okay, so my name is Jose Hernandez. I'm 20 years old. I'm currently a third-year student at CSUF. I was born and raised in California with my family of five, including one brother and one sister. The reason I decided to take this course was because it was a new learning opportunity that I thought could possibly be interesting and informative. One fun fact about me is that I love to play and watch soccer. I have been around this sport since I was a child and it has become one of my favorite sports, even though I do enjoy the sports as well. A second fun fact about me is that I have fractured two bones in the past. One occurred while playing soccer, and another one occurred while sitting on a chair. Lastly, some things that I enjoy doing on my free time include watching movies or episodes, watching sports, playing video games, listening to music, and spending time with my friends and family. And that's it. It's muted.
Thank you for that. I was saying thank you for that, Jose. Thank you for your introduction. And the first question would be using 3 to 5 examples from the reading. How do the methods and frameworks we use to study racialized and indigenous communities allow us to ask new questions about power? What do you think about that?
So the methods and frameworks that we use to study racialized and indigenous communities allow for us to ask new questions about power through the number of injustices that continue to occur. To begin with, racialized and indigenous communities face countless of injustices, are criminalized, and are treated completely differently than others. Saldivar mentions in the reading how communities of color in the United States and Israel are criminalized and targeted under the guise of national security, which is a big issue that continues to occur. People are meant to feel secure and protected, but instead, communities of color are in fear due to the injustices that they are put through. Secondly, Saldivar mentions how walls are a manifestation of oppressive power, which is something that I completely agree with. Walls are used all around us to separate one thing from another, which symbolizes how oppressive power is used when separating countries from one another with the use of walls. Um, when it comes to the border separating Mexico and the United States, walls are in place to stop people from going to other countries, especially coming to the United States. Many of the people wanting to cross are simply in search for a better life and opportunities that their countries do not offer. These walls prevent happiness, cause injuries, tear apart families, and even lead to death in some situations. As Saldivar mentions, walls are clearly much more than walls. They are a symbol of oppressive power. Lastly, Saldivar brings this issue to light in order to show how being able to go from one country to another is not easy for a person of color. Not only are people of color criminalized at borders, but they are also criminalized and stereotyped within these walls. I strongly believe that everyone should have the same opportunities and be treated equally. We are all humans and deserve respect and equality, but we live in a world where not everyone has the same mentality. Thank you.
Jose. I do like that answer. All right, let's move on to the second question. So also using 3 to 5 examples from our discussion of Kwashi and Moonlight, In what ways do the methods and frameworks Kwashi articulates help us better understand the fullness and complexity of the inner worlds of racialized and queer individuals and communities?
So the methods and frameworks that Kwashi articulates help us better understand the fullness and complexity of inner worlds of racialized and queer communities by covering topics such as resilience, expectations, and culture. To begin with, Kwashi's essay speaks on how Black people encounter racial injustices and are looked at completely differently than others. Kwashi mentions that resistance is in fact the dominant expectation we have of Black culture. Through this, Kwashi discusses how Black people are looked at by the general population, which includes being resilient, strong, and not emotional. This perspective that is created by the general public is built by the idea that Black people encounter so many hardships and racial injustices that they must be resilient and emotionally strong. Secondly, the film Moonlight captures these struggles through Sharon's story, who is forced to fight against an already set perspective. Sharon is mocked and bullied for not fitting the general perspective of masculinity. The people around him had an expectation that he was not meant to be weak or soft, which is a constant struggle that Sharon encounters through the film. We are even shown how his own mother calls him by homophobic slurs, which demonstrates that he is surrounded by an environment that does not want to accept him as the person that he wants to be. Sharon is constantly being reminded how he must act in order to fit the perspective and expectations of the general public. Lastly, Kwashi also mentions that as an identity, Blackness is always supposed to tell us something about race or racism, or about America, or violence and struggle and triumph, or poverty and hopefulness. Kwashi mentions this to speak on how Black people are stereotyped and expected to be and act in a certain way due to the hardships which the general public links them to. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. All right, the last question from the professor. It will be using 3 to 5 examples. How does the mestizaje of methods by Saldivar and sovereignty of quiet help us better understand the complex impact of racialized violence on the coming of age experiences addressed in I Dream in Another Language with the show Rami?
So mestizaje of methods and sovereignty of quiet help us better understand the complex impact of racialized violence on the coming of age experiences addressed in I Dream in Another Language with the show Remy through the topics included such as the importance of language and not sticking to stereotypes. To begin with, Saldivar mentions how communities of color in the United States and Israel are criminalized, which we get to see within the film called Remy. Remy is a child who is just like everyone else, but after the attacks of 9/11, Remy's life is completely changed since now he and his family are stereotyped as being terrorists by others. A scene that demonstrates this was when Remy was on his laptop and he decided to ask the group chat if they think that all Muslims are in on the attack. The people in the group chat quickly respond by saying yes. Shortly after this scene, while Remy is walking to school with his friends, he is asked if he or his family were terrorists since they were from the Middle East. These two scenes showed how Muslims were stereotyped after 9/11 due to their ethnicity and religion. Secondly, I Dream in Another Language and Remy both show the importance of language. I Dream in Another Language shows the importance of language through the Nikril language by demonstrating that by teaching others their language, it helps create an understanding and respect between different cultures. Lastly, on the other hand, Remy demonstrates the importance of language through the Arabic language by showing that understanding different cultures is very important. This is demonstrated in the scene where Remy's mother speaks to him in Arabic through walkie-talkie while Remy was in class. In this scene, Remy is quickly stereotyped as being a terrorist due to the language which his family speaks, and everyone, including the teacher, quickly looks at Remy with fear. Films like these really show the importance of learning about other cultures and how being stereotyped can have a huge impact on a person's life. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, a question that I wanted to ask you personally. is after seeing the film Moonlight, how would you say Chiron connects to other communities of color, such as the Latino community in the United States?
So after seeing the film Moonlight, I would say that Chiron connects to other communities of color, such as the Latino community in the United States, through the struggles which they encounter. Not only is there an already general expectation for Chiron, but there are also many other struggles which he has to encounter throughout the film. Such as this is the case, there are countless of racial injustices and struggles which other communities of color have to encounter. For example, the documentary called Fear and Learning at Hoover Elementary show us how certain racialized and indigenous communities are more likely to encounter certain types of traumas and PTSD than those who are not part of this group. Within this documentary, we get to see how children who attend this school are exposed to dangers such as robbery, drugs, and murder. We are also shown that many of the children within the school come from families that are economic or political refugees from other countries, which show how these communities are more likely to be exposed to certain situations that can later lead to PTSD. As for Chiron, his struggles are found all around him, including being raised by a single mother who is addicted to drugs, being unable to express his sexuality, and constantly being picked on for being soft. For example, there's a scene where Kevin asks Sharon why he always lets people pick on him. Sharon asks Kevin what he needs to do in order to stop people from picking on him. Kevin then replies by saying that all he has to do is show everybody that he is not soft. Sharon is constantly being reminded how he must act in order to fit in with the expectations that others have put on him, while all Sharon really wants to be is himself. Both of these situations, which I have mentioned, relate to one another due to the impact they can leave on any person, but especially on a child. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Well said. All right, the last question I wanted to ask you is after watching Rami and Moonlight, what connection can be made between the main characters of Rami and Chiron in order to better understand communities of color?
Okay, so after watching Rami and Moonlight, the connection that can be made between Rami and Chiron to better understand communities of color was in the way that they were both stereotyped. Rami was a child who came from a Muslim family. After 9/11, Rami and his family were stereotyped as terrorists in the perspective of the general public. Even though Rami was just like every other child, Rami was constantly being put in situations where others wanted him to prove that he was not a terrorist. Such as when Rami's father put up an American flag on his front porch in order to show the public that they stood with the United States. Furthermore, he is also excluded from a lot of different things. For example, Remy and his family are told that a pool party that they had been invited to had been canceled. The next day when Remy arrived at school, a classmate asked him why he didn't go to the pool party. Remy realized that the reason his family was told that it had been canceled was due to his classmates and their parents not wanting Remy and his family to be there. For Sharon, there is a stereotype and expectation tied to masculinity that the general public pushes onto him. Since Sharon is smaller than the rest of his classmates, he is mocked and bullied for not fitting this stereotype. For the most part, Juan is one of the few characters that make Sharon feel comfortable with being his true self. Regardless, Sharon is surrounded by people who won't allow him to be himself, and as a result, he is constantly trying to fit in with others in any way that he can, just like Remy also tries to fit in with his classmates. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose, and thank you for your time on the interview. Appreciate it. All right, now we'll continue. This is a little bit different since the professor did assign three of us. So now the second interview is gonna be from Jose to Adrian. And yeah, that'll be the second one. I'll just mute myself and let you guys introduce yourselves and ask the question.
Okay, so hello again. My name is Jose Hernandez. As I mentioned, I am 20 years old. I am currently a third-year student at CSUF. I was born and raised in California with a family of 5, including one brother and one sister. The reason I decided to take this course was because it was a new learning opportunity that I thought could possibly be interesting and informative. One fun fact about me is that I love to play and watch soccer. I've been around this sport since I was a child, and it has become my favorite sport, even though I do enjoy other sports as well. Second fun fact about me is that I have fractured two bones in the past. One occurred while playing soccer, and another occurred while sitting on a chair. Lastly, some things that I enjoy doing in my free time include watching movies or episodes, watching sports, playing video games, listening to music, and spending time with my friends and family. And I'm gonna pass it on to Adrian.
Thank you, Jose. Now it's my turn to introduce myself. Hello, my name is Adrian Zacapala, and I was born and raised in the city of Santa Ana, located in California. Currently, I am a full-time student at Cal State Fullerton, pursuing a degree in computer science, and I have a passion for playing video games. And sometime in the near future, I hope to leverage my computer skills and video game hobbies to make an impact in the tech industry. Throughout high school, I worked hard to maintain a high GPA and was recognized for my academic achievements. Working as a team is something that I particularly enjoy, and I'm always looking forward for ways to collaborate with others to achieve a common goal. When I'm not studying or working, you can often find me playing video games, like I said earlier, or tinkering with computers. Exploring new ways to use technology is something that I enjoy doing because it allows me to solve real world problems. And I'm also excited about the opportunities that a career in computer science will provide. And I am constantly seeking out new challenges to help me grow and develop my skills. Ultimately, I hope to use my knowledge and passion for technology to make a positive impact on the world around me.
Okay, so nice to meet you, Adrian. For question number one, using three to five examples from the reading, how do the methods and frameworks we use to study racialized and indigenous communities allow us to ask new questions about power?
Okay. An example from Saldivar's mestizaje of methods that show how the methods and frameworks we use to study racialized and indigenous communities allows us to speak about new questions about power is when Saldivar mentions, quote, staring at the apartheid wall, what the Israeli military calls the security fence. I thought about the militarization and the walls the United States is expanding along its southern borders. Under the pretext of war, walls, border, fronteras, checkpoints, troops, soldiers, the similarities are eerie. Saldivar's statements about the similarities between the Israeli security fence and the US southern border raises important question about its power and its relationship to walls and borders. The term of the apartheid wall suggests a form of segregation that is enforced through a physical barrier, and it makes me make the connection to what extent does power play in a role of becoming the problem and not the solution. Saldivar's comparison between the two walls highlight the power dynamics involved in the construction and enforcement of borders and how it can be used to control the movement of people. The use of military personnel to enforce these borders also raised the question about the roles of violence in the exercise of power. It raises the question, who has the power to construct walls and impose it on others? Secondly, what is the purpose of the wall? And what are the consequences of constructing such wall? Another example from Saldivar's mestizaje of methods is the taxi driver, where he responded that they were three Americans. We had already given the taxi driver our passports. And Saldivar also describes that, quote, knowing all too well the scrutiny we would have faced in order to be granted passage. This quote highlights the level of surveillance and scrutiny that the people face when traveling in areas that are occupied by forces of power. This quote suggests that being a citizen does not exempt one from this level of scrutiny and inclusion that comes with passing through a checkpoint. The word use of scrutiny also implies that the process of passing through the checkpoint is not straightforward and may involve questioning and inspection by the military personnel stationed there. This is exemplified by Saldivar's experience of being racially profiled for not looking American. Shortly after giving their passports to the taxi driver, the final example is when Saldivar is describing a personal encounter they had with a military checkpoint in Palestine. The encounter allowed me to see with stark clarity that the interlocking ways in which modes of exclusion manifest themselves in military power set by colonies with the aim of increasing national security. Throughout this experience, it helps me understand how military boundaries are established and used to exclude certain groups of people in the name of, quote, national security, focusing on emphasizing that these borders and modes of exclusion are not equal to Palestine, but are also present in settler colonial contexts around the world, like comparing it to the US-Mexico border. Also, Saldivar goes on to explain that this experience allowed them to see with, quote, stark clarity of how modes of exclusion within the context of settler colonialism.
Okay, well said, well said. As for question number 2, so using 3 to 5 examples from our discussion of Kwashi and Moonlight, in what ways do the methods and frameworks Kwashi articulates help us better understand the fullness and complexity of the inner worlds of racialized and queer individuals and communities?
The methods and frameworks in the discussion of Kwashi and the film Moonlight allows us to make the connection to understanding the inner worlds of racialized and queer individuals and communities. An example where this can be seen is with Chiron's character in the film Moonlight, where it provides context to the inner worlds of racialized and queer individuals and their communities. For example, Chiron feels that his community does not accept him based on his identity because it contradicts the norm of a man. Because a man should not be emotional and needs to be held up to a standard of being independent. The film gives us an understanding of how he is not being accepted, and it leads him to live in a world where Chiron keeps a low profile and a tight circle. Chiron's tight circle is made up of people who trust deeply and he feels comfortable with, expressing his thoughts and providing him with emotional support and encouragement. And throughout the film, Chiron is depicted as a quiet character, an example that helps us understand the inner worlds of racialized and queer individuals and their communities is Kwashi's description of quiet. Kwashi describes it as, quote, quiet instead is a metaphor for the full range of one's inner life, one's desire, ambitions, hungers, vulnerabilities, fears, quote. Kwashi is describing how quiet can demonstrate the feelings of a person has on their surroundings. In this, I can relate it to Chiron's character of feeling the need to conceal his true self. This tells me about Chiron's desire of wanting his community to support him, but the opposite is shown in the film, where Chiron feels isolated and obligated by his community to be someone else. The last example is also taken from the reading, where Kwashi talks about understanding how quiet can be used to uncover people's experience and go deeper than what the history tells us. Kwashi states, quote, how can quiet as a framework for reading Black culture expose life that is not already determined by narratives of the world of the social world? Quote. Kwashi brings up a good question because quiet can give us an understanding of the experience of marginalized communities by looking at how the correlation between quiet and emotion/feelings, like seen in the film Moonlight, where Chiron's quietness reveals his fears of being rejected or facing discrimination from his community.
Okay, I really like that answer. As for question number 3, using 3 to 5 examples, how does a mestizaje of methods and sovereignty of quiet help us better understand the complex impact of racialized violence on the coming of age experiences
Mhm.
that are addressed in I Dream in Another Language and with the show Remy?
Saldivar's mestizaje of methods and sovereignty of quiet allows us to address the racialized violence on coming of age as seen in I Dream in Another Language and the show Remy. In the video Strawberry, Remy is faced with racialized violence after the 9/11 attacks, where he is just judged based on his race. For example, in the scene at 11 minutes of the Strawberry, it shows the racialized violence towards his sense of belonging and not fitting in, because Remy asks someone else if quote, you think all Muslims are on it, quote, and is met with a lot of hateful comments. In Saldivar's mestizaje of methods, Saldivar mentions, quote, essentially, we are not, quote, Americans, enough to be allowed easy passage. And I feel this connects with being racially profiled because they are using a parent's race or ethnicity to target a specific community. For example, Saldivar describes the treatment of soldiers at the border because they don't appear to look a certain way. This is also seen in the video Strawberry with Remy, where he is excluded from James' pool party. In the film, quote, I Dream in Another Language, the use of the Zikriel language culture helps us understand the impact of coming of age and racialized violence. For example, the church plays an important role in shaping Evaristo's and Don Isauro identity because the church is teaching the people of San Isidro Spanish and changing their cultures.
Okay, good. So after listening to your 3 responses, a question that came up to me was, how does a theme of acceptance manifest in the film Moonlight in relation to Sharon's struggle to be accepted for who he is, both by his peers and by his own family?
So Sharon's struggles for acceptance by is compounded by the stereotypes and stigmas that exist in his community. The theme of acceptance and being able to truly be yourself is a major theme in the film Moonlight, where we see him grapple with feelings of isolation and rejection. In a way, we're trying to follow Sharon's journey, navigating in a world that is hostile to his identity. In many ways, the film shows the complexity of identity and the intersectionality of different identities, such as race, gender, and sexuality. Chiron's relationship with his mother is especially powerful, as it shows how even the people who are supposed to love and accept us unconditionally can fail to do so. Teresa's love for Chiron is genuine, as is Juan, which makes it possible for both of them to provide the support and acceptance that Chiron needs. On the other hand, Chiron's experience with his mother shapes his understanding and love and acceptance, making it difficult for him to trust others and feel like he deserves to be loved. For example, Chiron is ridiculed for not fitting into traditional notions of Black masculinity, and he is afraid to express his identity for fear of being targeted. In his reunion with Kevin, Chiron finally is able to be himself, which allows him to share his experience with someone who understands him. Kevin's acceptance of Chiron's identity is a powerful moment, demonstrating the acceptance, ending Chiron's journey on a positive note.
Okay, well said, well said. I had one more question. So how can Saldivar's mestizaje method be applied to analyze the cultural experiences of marginalized communities beyond the ones talked about in the reading?
Saldivar's mestizaje of methods can be applied to analyze the cultural experiences of marginalized communities beyond the reading, such as the indigenous communities as seen in the film Rhymes for Young Girls. The film Rhymes for Young Girls illustrates how residential schools have affected the indigenous communities while following the story of Aliyah, who refuses to be broken down by the oppressive forces around her. The film explores the struggles of indigenous youth and their families, who are also forced to attend a residential school. And I could make the connection between the Saldivar's perspective of power, which influences communities, to the trauma it brings to marginalized communities. In the film, the Indian agents are portrayed as a symbol of division, where oppressive forces are established by the government to control indigenous communities. For example, in Saldivar Mestizaje of Metis, it talks about being judged based on their skin color, and this ties in with suffering of Palestinians and Mexicans. Remark similarly where the border is illustrated as a symbol of division. I can make the connection about the Indian agents being placed in their communities to destroy their culture and traditions. For example, forcing members of indigenous communities to attend residential schools is an indicator that culture assimilation took place. Forcing members of community to become someone else. It makes me think about what the motive was to put orders in place, or to have the option to control or manipulate these communities. The reading emphasizes that every human should be treated equally, irrespective of their background.
Okay, really well said. All 5 questions, great. And this concludes the end of our interview. And now I will pass it on to Adrian and Claudio.
All right, thank you. Hello, my name is Adrian Sacopala. I am a Cal State University Fullerton student. I enjoy playing video games, and a fun fact about me is I enjoy watching football, and I also play football. And I took this class to learn more about the Chicano history. And one thing that I just recently found out was how history hasn't showed us a lot of people's lived experiences. Now I'm gonna introduce Claudio.
Hello, my name is Claudio Garcia. I am 28 years old. I'm a business major with a concentration in finance. I should be graduating next year. I also served in the military in the United States Army for 4 years as an artillery cannon crew member. Growing up, I had divorce parents, which was not an ordinary divorce. I was living half of my life in Mexico 1 year, and the other year in the United States. So I got to see a little bit of diversity when it comes to culture. And then I kept doing that till I was 13 years old. And at 13 years old, I finally stayed here and grew up from 13 to 18, went to the military. After 18 to 22, I got out the military. I went to college, and I've been here ever since. Switched my major from accounting to finance in order to get my CFP, and now here we are. I really look forward to having this class. Well, finishing it, because coming from Mexican background, I think it's good that I learn about Chicano culture. So far, I have not been disappointed. It's been a very interesting class overall, and I learned a lot of topics that I would have looked up by myself otherwise. Pleasure to meet
Thank
you.
you, Claudio. Yeah, pleasure to meet you too. Let's get going. Question 1: using 3 to 5 examples from the reading, How does the method and framework we use to study racialized and indigenous communities allows us to ask new questions about power?
Okay, so one example quote from the reading, Mestizajes of Mexico, a Mestizaje of methods from Mexico to Palestine, that shows the methods and frameworks of racialized and indigenous communities is when Martha Vanessa Saldivar says one particular checkpoint crossing entrenched itself in my memory more deeply than the rest of them and became the impetus for the thoughts I share in these pages. The encounter allowed me to see with a stark clarity the interlocking ways in which modes of exclusion manifest themselves in military boundaries set by settler colonies in the aim of increasing national security. End of quote. So this quote caught my attention because she put national security in between the quotation marks, which shows how she does not agree with the borders increasing national security. What I think she believes is that borders do more harm for people than benefiting them. I also picked this quote because it shows the power that the military imposes on the people at the border that was created by the colonies. I personally believe that a lot of people believe that borders keep people safe, but I think most of the time we overlook the negatives of having a border, negatives such as separating families, creating racism. We should find the in-between line where if we do decide to have a border, it should not just be a black, white, or yes and no, meaning denying people for entry should be a more specific topic, like to those people that have committed crimes before, but not just denying entry because they are from another country and they're coming to find more opportunity. Another example quote that reaffirms the methods and frameworks of racialized indigenous communities is when they got pulled over at the border and the Israeli soldier asked if they were American or Arab American. This is a great example from the reading of how they hold different standards or different powers between the different races. This part in the reading shows how racist and discriminatory the military was with Martha Vanessa Saldivar and to anyone that is anything different from a Native American. I don't think anyone should be looked down upon because of where they came from, nor treated in a negative manner because of the race. The last quote I found on the reading that allows us to ask new questions about power is when Martha Vanessa Saldivar talked about how even though they had American passport, it did not make a difference, and the guards still proceeded to treat them poorly and inspected the vehicle as if they were criminals. She mentioned how quotations quote the search was conducted in such a manner as to maximize fastidiousness and inconvenience along with militaristic flair without an actual inspection. Quote, coming from a military background and finding out about the situation was very shocking for me. It is disgusting to think that anyone in uniform would abuse their power since that is not what we stand for, at least not in the United States Army. That concludes my first answer.
Thank you, Claudio. Amazing response with a lot of insight.
Thank you.
Question 2. Using 3 to 5 examples from our discussion of Kwashi and Moonlight, in what ways do the methods and frameworks Kwashi articulates help us better understand the fullness and the complexity of the inner worlds of racialized and queer individuals and communities?
Okay, so Kwashi and Moonlight help us better understand the fullness and complexity of inner world and racialized and queer individuals communities by showing us different examples in Black culture, whether it be through art, music, or other examples to express that there is revolution in quietness. An example from the reading that further exemplifies that is when Kwashi talks about Stephanie's camps closer to freedom, enslaved women and everyday resistance in the plantation south and how women use their everyday lives to defy slavery. The way that these women live their everyday lives to restore some sense of humanity by not letting slavery define them. They build gardens and have parties. This is powerful because they are choosing not to only try and make the best of a negative situation, but it also demonstrates the strength that these oppressed groups of people had and continue to have. Another artist that is brought up onto the reading is Whitfield Lovell. Kwashi says that his use of shadow is astute, and the result is astute, and the result is images of people who look like people, not symbols of a discourse of racism. put people in everyday worry and absolute life. This continues to push the idea that we need to stop looking at Black people as oppressed people. He then goes and says, quiet is authenticated to how we think about Black culture. And by extension, Black community is portrayed as an extension of racism. He states that the way that Black culture is not always dramatic and racial, that there is more to them. Crochet argues that it is often overlooked. This is why he states Lovell's artwork is remarkable because, just like Stephanie's book, it talks about humanity without being political. Another quote from the reading, and personally my favorite quote that summarizes the reading, is when he states, all living is political, every human action means something, but all living is not a protest. In protest. Assume is to disregard the richness of life. He offers a few examples throughout the breakdown of the chapters to explain this point and how artists of every type are now using quiet form of powerful oppression and can be important in Black culture. One chapter looks at how quietness can be meaningful in groups, using examples like James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time and Elizabeth Alexander's poem Praise Song of the Day. Another chapter looks how quietness can be expressed using examples like poems by Natasha Threadaway and Dion Brand and visual plays by Lorna Simpson. The last chapter talks about quietness and how it is connected to the idea of oneness and how Black women have contributed to this idea. The book concludes by thinking about the importance of quietness. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudio, for your response. Next question, question 3. Using 3 to 5 examples, how does mestizaje of methods and sovereignty of quiet help us better understand the complexity, impact of racialized violence on the coming of age experiences addressed in I Dream in Another Language with the show Remy?
Yeah, this one I decided to go a little bit more into the detail into the film I Dream in Another Language. So the first example of racialized violence I saw in the film I Dream in Another Language by Ernesto Contreras was at the beginning of the film when an old man named Isauro is shown being beaten by a group of younger men from a different indigenous community. This came about as a result of a long-lasting hatred and conflict between the two communities, and it highlights the way in which racial and ethnic differences can lead to violence and oppression. Later in the film, we learn that the language spoken by Cyril and his fellow elders is in danger of disappearing as the younger generation has abandoned it, and as time goes by, it is slowly replaced with Spanish. The way that they are abandoning their native language to learn Spanish can be portrayed as an act of cultural violence and heritage towards the native language. Lastly, towards the end of the film, it is revealed that the character Evaristo was actually murdered by a group of white settlers many years ago. The only reason why they murdered Evaristo was because he was indigenous, or in other words, it was an act of cultural violence. This racialized violence shows the historical and ongoing injustices faced by the indigenous people in many parts of the world, not only back then, but even up to date.
Thank you, Claudio. I have some questions to ask you, Claudio. The first question.
Thank you. Go for it.
What do you think was the true meaning behind the reading Kwashi? What do you think he means by the word quiet?
Okay, so I think in the reading from Kwashi, we learned about that there were other ways to stand up to racism other than protesting. It was very insightful how he defines the way that people stood up against racism in a quiet way. He talks about how women will garden and plant and party every day to defy them. This really caught my attention because I had never heard of such a thing. But after reading it and understanding it, it made a lot of sense. To me, it was the equivalent to what my mom would always tell me growing up, and I still believe in that up to date. She will tell me I control the power of or the value of words. This means that if someone tells me something that is negative, but I already know that it isn't true, then I will simply choose to ignore it. An example of that would be if someone comes up to me and calls me dumb, as an example, me being who I am, I know that is clearly not true, so I will not give those words any value, and therefore they will not affect me. I think this was the point Crochet was trying to make through his reading, and I thought it was brilliant. Overall, I got out of the what I got out of the reading from Crochet was that you can also protest in a quiet way, and it does not have to always be in a traditional manner, like we know.
Thank you for your response, Claudio. One last question, Claudio, I have for you. After reading The Mestizaje of Methods and watching I Dream in Another Language, what are some similarities that both of them share when it comes to racialized community violence?
So for me, both the readings of Mestizaje of Methods and I Dream in Another Language have a lot of racialized community violence similarities. It is interesting to see how in the Mestizaje reading is shown through racial profiling when Martha, Vanessa, and Saldivar will get questioned whether she was American American or Arab American. On the other hand, we get to see how racial violence can also be seen through something as simple as a different language. We see how Isauro gets beaten by a group of younger men just because he was from a different community. The similarity here is that hatred in both the readings, Mestizaje Methods and the film I Dream in Another Language, just from being from another country or a different community. It shows that there is racism from the lowest level of groups such as communities all the way to the highest level as the border from one country to the other.
Thank you, Claudio, for your response. And that concludes our presentation interview. Any closing remarks?
No, thank you. Thank you guys for everything, and I really enjoy working with you guys.
Yeah, thank you
and,
guys too.
All right,
and
well, I'll
also
conclude the
Go
I
ahead.
would like to add
Go ahead.
that
Go
overall,
ahead.
after going through this interview process and listening to all the responses that were provided, I feel like I was able to learn more about Unit 2 and add to my understanding of each topic that we have discussed today by being able to listen to a different perspective than my own. I really enjoyed this experience, so I would like to thank you both, Claudio and Adrian, for sharing your perspectives and giving your time to be a part of this interview. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. I
Yeah,
totally
thank you.
agree. I think hearing everyone's answer it got me to cover every single part of the reading and the TV and the show, you know. So yeah, I agree 100% with you, Jose. Do you have anything to say, Adrian?
I mean, yeah, we learned a lot of valuable information in this chapter. For example, about quiet and how it could be used to find more information about people lived experiences. And
Yeah.
it also shed some light on the problem that is not showed on the history books.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Well, this concludes our interview, and I'm gonna stop the recording now.